Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to another MaxWell Care group visit. I'm Cliff Syner. I'm one of the PAs with the MaxWell Clinic, and I'm really looking forward to being able to talk with you guys today. I've enjoyed these group visits, hearing from Dr. Hazy and Dr. Ferris and Dr. Woods, and I'm just thankful that I get to be a part of this team and get to share on a topic that I am so passionate about. So we'll be talking today about community, connection, and health. If you have any questions, you can type those into the question section here in the group visit. And then at the end of the visit, then I'll be answering those questions. So there are 5 fundamentals that we talk about in functional medicine. So those 5 fundamentals are nutrition, which if you're a patient of the MaxWell Clinic, you've heard plenty about. Stress, also something that we think is very, very important. Movement, which includes exercise, but is not just exercise. Rest, and relationship. And what we know through research, what we have seen and experienced in our own lives, what we have seen in the lives of the patients that we treat, is that none of those other fundamentals can reach their potential if relationship is not an important piece of the treatment plan. So today we will be talking about relationships specifically from the aspect of community. We have been created to thrive within community, with each other, and with our environment. There's no way to ignore the connection between community and health and still reach wellness. So in my own life, when I think back about how community has impacted my health and how my health has impacted my community around me, I think back to when I was a small child and I was born and lived my early years in Appalachia, in the mountains of West Virginia. And if you know anything about that area of the country, if you know anything at all, you probably know that it's not known for its health. And community there is not focused on health typically. It is definitely focused on loving your neighbor, on caring for those around you. It's deeply known for its hospitality, but it's also known for chronic disease. And I can tell you that if you wanted to live a healthy life, growing up there, it would be difficult because there's always family gatherings, and those family gatherings always include lots of sweet tea and barbecue and cakes and pies and cookies and pepperoni rolls, which were one of my favorite. And so it's just not a place that places a high value on nutrition. And it hurts. I mean, it does make a difference there. We see a lot of chronic disease, and reversing that one patient at a time without helping to change the community is extremely difficult. And then I also think back to my time as a soldier in special operations and seeing those soldiers that I was honored to work with, some of the most elite warriors in the world. They strove towards health, and their jobs demanded it, and they lived it out. And so it was almost difficult to not be healthy in that environment because exercise, training for the mission, the way we ate, the way we hydrated, the way we kept each other accountable for those things, knowing that your very lives depend upon it, it pushes you to be your very best. And so in looking at these 2 aspects of my life and communities in which I've seen very differing views on health, it made me think about that, ponder that, especially as I got into medicine on the outside in the civilian world, as we call it, right after I got out of the Army in 2014. And I learned something about research that had been done all around the world through something called the Blue Zones. And this was National Geographic that sent explorers all over the world looking for the healthiest people, looking for people who tended to live the longest. Now, it's not only about living long, right? Like that's not our goal. Our goal is to live healthy. And then hopefully that will correlate into length of living. So they went all around the world and they looked at all of these different communities and they studied them. And 5 specific communities really stood out. And those communities are Sardinia, Italy, Ikaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Loma, California, and Nicoya, Costa Rica. So at first glance, you might think, well, all of these places are warm, or all of these places are near the equator, or they're all near the water. So I bet they eat a lot of fish. And in a lot of these places, they do eat fish, but not all of them. It's really interesting that it wasn't food by itself that made the biggest difference, because as we'll discuss, some of these places didn't put a big focus on nutrition. It wasn't just movement or exercise. Even though exercise and movement is a common thread, it's not across the board a perfect standard. It's not just sleep or rest, or as you'll hear about in one of these groups that is dedicated to taking 1 day off every single week. It's not only about rest, even though rest is an important component of all of these structures, of all of these communities. But what really makes the difference in all of these communities and in other communities that have been studied around the world is the health of the community, of the culture that they live in. That's what makes the biggest difference. So in Sardinia, Italy, what they've noticed is that the families and the groups of families, they live together as shepherds, and they tend to their animals, and they take their animals from the plains up into the mountains, and then they bring them home. Again, lots of movement, lots of walking. They eat a diet, interestingly, of mostly cheese, bread, and wine, right? How's that sound for a health food prescription? So now, when I say cheese, I don't want you to think about the processed cheese that we see laying in our grocery stores, because this is not the same thing. This is sheep cheese, usually aged with their enzymes and bacteria present. So a little different product than what we would normally find. The bread was typically sourdough, and the wine was made from very specific grapes using a fermenting process that has been going on for at least 1,000 years. So even though it seems like we could easily reproduce that, cheese, bread, and wine, or maybe many of us already do, it is specific cheeses, specific bread, and specific wine. And they also grow a lot of their own vegetables, which is a big part of that, and eat a lot of lamb. Being shepherds, I think that makes sense. Although me and my wife had a sheep farm, and we found it very difficult to eat the lamb that we grew. But I guess if you've been doing it for a long time, that would make it a lot easier. So we see that in Sardinia. In Ikaria, Greece, this is where the Mediterranean diet shines. This is the epitome. If you want to learn about what the Mediterranean diet looks like, or if you read all of the studies that have been done around health and the Mediterranean diet, then Ikaria, Greece would be the shining star of what that would look like. But they're not doing it in isolation. They do it as a community. How many of us have decided, you know what? I'm going to change the way I eat. I'm going to eat healthy, and I'm going to base it on research, and I'm going to have all kinds of resources, and I'm going to set up food plans, and I'm going to go to the grocery store, and I'm going to pre-cook my food for the week, and I'm going to have everything I need lined out. And we can do those things. But the one thing that will usually knock us off of that path towards wellness and healthy eating is community. When others around us are not eating and living in the same way, it becomes very difficult to continue that all by yourself. And in this small community in Greece, that's not a problem. It would be strange or odd for them to eat fast food. Whereas for us, it may be strange or odd to eat sardines wrapped in spinach. I don't know, it's a delicious snack, but you could see where some people would think that that's strange or different. So for them, it's a normal way of eating. It's part of their community. So then we have Okinawa. In Okinawa, an island on the southern end of Japan, there's been a lot of upheaval on that island over the last 100 years. I remember hearing one story of a centurion, it was a lady who had lived to be over 100, and she recalled her time during World War II, and how for at least 2 years, she ate almost nothing but purple sweet potatoes. Because of the war-torn devastation of their country, there was nothing else available. Also in Okinawa, which is an island, and so you think they have lots of fish, and they do, but they also eat pork, something that often we say is horrible, a food that we should stay away from. But the way they eat their pork is a little different than us. So usually, each family would have their own pig, and right around New Year's, that pig would be slaughtered, just like other pigs were being slaughtered in that whole community at the same time. And then that one pig would last them the entire year. And they would share it with their community, and it would be for special events or community gatherings. In Okinawa, they also have an idea called ikigai. Ikigai. It's a strange name, right? But what does it mean? It means a purpose of living. Sometimes in the MaxWell Clinic, you'll hear it said, what do you want your health for? What is your reason for being? And this is more than what we usually think about in Western culture. In Western culture, we may say things like, well, my reason for being is my job, whatever my job is, right? We meet each other on the street and we say, what do you do? Right? That's almost the most important thing. I mean, we may ask names first, but we're really interested in what does this new person that I'm meeting, what do they do? So for the Japanese, though, this encompasses so much more. This is, what do you love? What does the world need? What are you good at? And what can provide you resources? So you could take each one of those things. What do you love? What does the world need? What are you good at? And what gives you resources? And you could make circles out of each of these. And where those circles all intersect, that is your purpose for living. And in their culture, when they wake up in the morning, that thought is on their mind. When they go out into their day, that purpose is on their mind. When they sit down for meals, when they relax, when they're fishing, when they're gathering, when they're growing crops, that purpose is on their mind. They also have another interesting aspect of living in community, and it's called moai. And the idea of moai is that you would form friendships, but they're more than friendships. You would also work with these individuals. You would gossip and hang out and spend time with these individuals and share meals and families with these individuals. And these groups are set at a very young age, as babies. As babies, they begin to interact with the people who will be their closest core and inner circle. As they grow older, they will go to school with these individuals. They will share life with these individuals. This group, this small community, as they age, will begin to develop their own purpose of life together and what this group is for. And some of these groups have been known to be together for over 90 years. And then we look at Loma Linda. So Loma Linda is in California. And I know that it might surprise many of you. It certainly surprised me to think that we would have a blue zone here in the United States. And to think about what is it that actually brings Loma Linda into this very small fraternity of communities who tend to live the longest and live the healthiest. So in Loma Linda, they tend to eat a plant-based diet. And even though what's interesting is in this community, it's a community of Seventh-day Adventists. So they're all very faithful. They have a school there, university there. And so they do a lot of education. Education is very important there. And even though the plant-based diet is the norm, it seems like from studies that have been done, those that add a little bit of fish to their diet throughout the week tend to actually live a little bit longer. So though this is this is a culture though of health. This is actually part of their faith, is eating according to how they feel like God has called them to live. And they use a lot of the biblical, specifically in the Old Testament, a lot of the biblical dietary laws they use as their standard. Not exactly, but so with, sort of within that context. And they have truly prioritized that. Now, not only have they prioritized food and nutrition, but they've prioritized rest. You see, in the Old Testament, we read about the Sabbath. And so, a lot of Christian traditions have interpreted that differently. But for this group, they have decided that, that day is Saturday, that is that one day of the week, and they are going to take it extremely seriously. I think that's interesting because in our Western culture, production is the most important thing. When you see a friend you haven't seen in a while, you may say something like, "Hey man, how you been?" And then the usual response would be something like, "Man, it's been really busy. I just need a break." And there's almost a sense of pride that we can get from saying that, right? That we know we filled every single second with something important. So for a community to step outside of that, could you imagine? Could you imagine running into an old friend and say, "Hey, how have you been? How are things going?" And you'd be like, "Oh man, I just cleared my calendar and I've just been really relaxing, just contemplating a lot, just considering what's going on in the world and what I can do to make an impact." It almost sounds weird to say, right? But we do know that rest is important. Rest is crucial to our ability to grow towards wellness. I can't even count the number of patients that I've seen and even experienced in my own life. This idea of needing to exercise harder, right? Or work harder or produce more, and how that actually leads to us producing less or being less strong. It's well known in the fitness world that in order to get stronger, you have to take time to rest. You have to recover well. And we now have all kinds of cool gadgets to help us figure that out. Heart rate variability is one of my favorite because looking at heart rate variability every day, you can get a clear sense of how well you're recovering. It may seem strange that we need something like that to help us understand when to rest. But be what it may, I'm thankful that we have that technology. So there was actually a study done in Vanderbilt in 2017 that looked at faith and church attendance and allostatic load. So what's interesting is, well, maybe I should explain allostatic load first. So sometimes allostatic load is known as stress, right? This is the stress. And when we think about stress, we think about it from the outside, right? So we think about what are people doing to me? What are the demands that are placed upon me by my job, by my family, by the goals that I hope to accomplish, by maybe the political environment, or maybe wars that are going on around the world, or what we're doing to impact those things. So those things certainly can cause stress, and they are part of allostatic load. But we also have this stress that comes from within. And a lot of times we will call that inflammation. So we look at things like elevated small LDL cholesterol and the plaque that it can cause that leads to inflammation in our arteries, eventually breaks off and becomes a heart attack, or elevated blood pressure, or C-reactive protein or homocysteine. These are just some of the labs that we use to measure inflammation. Those things are also part of our allostatic load. And in this study at Vanderbilt, they looked at all of those things to determine how church attendance, but not just attending, but regular church attendance and part of that corporate body of worship, how that impacted their health. And it was interesting to note that it did make an impact, right? Like it made a huge impact. That there is just no question that gathering regularly for a time of worship with a group of fellow believers had an absolutely huge impact on our health and helped people either grow towards wellness or stay well if they were already there. And of course, this makes sense, right? If we've been designed for community, and if we could live in a community, so you can start to see the power that this could have. If that local body, if that local worship group that you belong to, if they also place a priority on how we live within the environment, on eating and living the way we've been created, on how we care for our environment, and how we steward the things that we've been gifted to, just like the shepherds in Sardinia or the farmers in Greece. If we live into those things as part of the created order, then of course we're going to be healthy. So the last spot that is known as a blue zone is Nicoya. So Nicoya is in Costa Rica. And here they have a saying, and you may have heard it if you've ever been to Costa Rica. Pura vida, and it means simple life. So in Nicoya, you see, family is of the utmost importance. Divorce is rare here, even though I think the statistic can be a little confusing. So family is very important. Divorce is rare, but it doesn't mean that there's not marital issues. It is sort of a strange thing, and I am not encouraging infidelity here, but it's strange that in Costa Rica that they tend to have high rates of infidelity, but low divorce rates. And it's not that they live in anger, but they have a sense, and it's really hard to explain this unless you've actually been there and sort of been in these communities. They have a sense of understanding the worth of an individual for who they are and loving them where they are and recognizing that helping to keep a family together is going to be far more important than just trying to break away from that family for your own benefit. And so they go through some tremendously hard times. But what is so beautiful is that the love that they still have and that they still share there. So it's this idea of accepting people for who they are, for where they are, that helps make this blue zone so incredibly special. When me and my wife visited there a few years ago, we were struck by the hospitality there. We went with some friends of ours who had been born and raised there in Nicoya, but had moved to Hawaii, and that's where we met them. Like I said, this was a few years ago. And, their families, they just brought us in. My friend's mom just gave us her bedroom and showed us where the food was, and was up early preparing meals and with enthusiasm. This is not a hospitality that sort of grates at you, that's frustrating, that you would have to have strangers in your home, but one that truly sees it as a special opportunity. And it's a mindset that makes a difference. And for them, it's that mindset that is pura vida, that is that simple life. And it's us seeking to live into that simple life that can make all the difference in the world. An example that I thought of concerning this in Costa Rica was the road workers. So, in most countries, you're going to have people whose job it is to clean the sides of the roads, to keep the weeds down, to keep things, from coming into the road and causing hazards. And Costa Rica is no different. So I remember one morning we were headed down to the beach from the mountains, and we passed a group of men who were out there, and they were tending to this area along the road. And they just had machetes, right? So immediately I was hit by, there's no gas powered equipment, right? There was all machetes and handheld manual labor. And so right there, we know that movement is going to be increased, right? This is going to be a lot harder work than for us who would typically use, weed eaters or other gas powered equipment. Now it's interesting that it's not because they're not choosing these things. They're not choosing this manual labor because they think that would be better for you. They're doing it because the price of gasoline is very, very expensive. So those are other things to consider in your community, in your relationships, and how you live in your community, is what things can you do that might be a little more difficult, where you can sort of build resistance into your life. So they're working, and they're working very hard, and they're clearing off this hillside. Then we came back through, I think it was probably about 1 o'clock. We were headed back up, and we were going to go get something to eat. And they were all like laying underneath of this large mango tree. And some of them were throwing their machetes up into the mango tree to get the mangoes to fall out. And that was their lunch for today. They didn't see any other food. They all had big gallons of water, and they were eating mangoes. And then on the way back down, after we had finished eating our lunch, we seen that they were all just taking a nap. And by this time, it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So they have the culture of a really hard labor, hard work outside. And then being able to take advantage of what's growing around us. So for us in the US, especially here in Middle Tennessee, it might be a little bit difficult to have food that grows for us all year round, right? But it's that idea of eating local, healthy food. And then they would enjoy the afternoon in slumber, sleeping, resting, the hot hours of the day away, and then working as it cools down, as the afternoon wanes on. So that is this clear example of kind of a simple way of living. So where does this leave us? Must we all now move to a blue zone or become special operations warriors? I mean, we could all move to a blue zone, right? I mean, I think that would be fun. But we're in Middle Tennessee for a reason, and I think that we're called here. So I think we should figure out how to make it work. We can build those communities right here. There are actually communities in the U.S. who have already done that. Some as far north as Minnesota, who have made a decision that their communities are going to be based around the ideals of these blue zones. And what is so cool is the way that their markers of mortality and their chronic disease comes down. Their allostatic load decreases. We have the power to do that right here where we live. So the first thing we have to do is understand the community that we live in. Understand that the community that most of us are living in right now is not all that open to change. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that we need to rage against it in some sort of angry, we know how you should eat and you should eat that way too, sort of a way. But rather we meet people where they are, understanding the stressors that they have on their life, and we show them a different way. We be a healing presence for them because of the healing that has occurred in us. That's where we start to make the change in our community. That is how we grow healthy communities. We do it by loving people right where they are, one person at a time, which is exactly what we are striving to do here at the MaxWell Clinic. Maximize wellness, one unique person at a time. And as we continue to do that, we start to build a critical mass of like-minded people who long to see a difference in their community. And that is exactly what I would encourage you to do. I would encourage you to take the knowledge and the wisdom that you gain by being a patient at the MaxWell Clinic and share that knowledge. Share that knowledge in love. Share it in kindness, but do share it. Look up things like the blue zones. Look at ways that we can change our communities for the better. And by taking these principles, we have the power to make a dramatic difference in our community. Well, thank you for being with me today. This has been a lot of fun. As you can see, I'm very passionate about community. I think that this is where change happens, right? We create health by first looking in and then sharing that health outward. So I would encourage you to keep doing that. If you have any questions or any ideas, I would love to hear those. I look forward to seeing you guys in the exam room and then hopefully for another one of these group visits. Let's check. I don't think we have any questions, but I'm going to take a look here. Nope, it doesn't look like any showed up. So it was a pleasure being with you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day.